Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, or for that matter, depending on whether you're watching the recording of this. Welcome to the latest in our Global Mapper webinar series. For those of us here on the East Coast, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. I appreciate you joining us, appreciate you taking an interest in Global Mapper, and hopefully today we will be providing you with some information which you will find useful, either as a user or perhaps as a potential user of the software. When we were designing the contents of this morning's program, we decided we would kind of broaden the scope, if you like, and provide instructional information that covers a wide range of functionality. So hopefully there'll be something in here for everyone, both novices and our advanced users. We will be going for about an hour. We'll wrap up within about 60 minutes. If during that time you have any questions about any of the functionality or any of the tools that I'm going to show you, feel free to use our question function, or the GoToWebinar question function, which you'll find on the right side of the screen. There are a number of my esteemed colleagues who are standing by to answer your questions. If we don't get a chance to address your questions during the session itself, we will follow up, and as always, you will have the opportunity to ask additional questions as we through our normal email channels on an ongoing basis. I will provide some additional contact information at the end of our session, so that you can again ask additional questions or follow up with some of the information in this session as needed. Personal introduction, and my name is David McKittrick. You're seeing my contact information right there on the screen. I'm a Senior Application Specialist here at Blue Marble. One point of note before we get going with our session, we did have some comments, some concerns with some folks who were interested in attending, that the time zone was not favorable, especially some of the folks who are on the West Coast here in the United States. Just by way of explanation, we do have a worldwide audience for these sessions, so it's impossible for us to accommodate everybody's workday. So with apologies, we do try to vary the start time to accommodate those varying schedules. So we apologize if this is a little early for you, or perhaps a little late as well. We would obviously, with the recorded version going to be being posted online, you do have the opportunity to revisit and watch this at your leisure. So for today, very quickly, I'm going to go through an agenda. Now, in drawing up an agenda for today's session was a little bit difficult because as I glanced through my notes, we are going to be touching on a wide variety of functions within the software. We entitled this session Tips and Tricks, and I tried, when I was planning this, to kind of segment them, what would be defined as a tip and what would be defined as a trick. The tips would be essentially ways of using the software to its best, most effective use, and some tricks would become some of those hidden functions. And I'm going to introduce you to some of those as well, some of those creative uses of the software, so to speak. So we will have some tips, some recommendations for efficiently and effectively using the software, and some, as I said, some creative ways of applying some of the available functionality. I'm going to start with some basic software operations. With apologies to those of you who have been using Global Mapper for some time, this section is going to basically cover some of the recommendations just for getting up and running with the software in its most effective and efficient way. As part of that, we will talk a little bit about workspaces and what a workspace is. I've had numerous occasions when I've worked with customers or spoken with customers who really don't quite have a grasp of the concept of the workspace. I'm going to explain a little bit about what a workspace is, and your understanding of the workspace and managing your workspace will really help you when it comes to using the software to its fullest potential. We're going to get into some specific functions then, and this is a feature that is very often overlooked, and this is assigning feature types. When you create a feature or when you import a feature, assigning it to a particular type allows you to better organize your data, to automatically assign symbology or shading, and also to pre-populate it with available attributes. So I'm going to go through a couple of those scenarios where we talk about feature types and why you should be aware of this function within the software. We're going to talk a little bit about spatial bookmarking, a very useful function that allows you to record locations. This would fall under the category of a trick as opposed to a tip. Optimized label placement is a little trick you can follow, or a little set of procedures you can follow to really make that labeling function a lot more flexible, a lot more powerful. I'll show you how we can do that using a little creativity. I'm going to work through a thematic mapping scenario, playing on the idea that we can actually assign symbology or assign the visual characteristics of the features on a map to represent some of the inherent data. We're going to talk a little bit about age matching. Now, if you looked up age matching in the user guide or any of the documentation, you probably find no reference to it. So we're going to apply an existing function or a tool that's already in the software and use it in a very creative way for basically aligning or matching abutting features, specifically polygon features or area features. So again, a little creative use of the software. And then we're going to talk about vectorizing. Basically, we're going to take some raster layers in various formats. We're going to take a scan topographic map and a couple of elevation layers. And we're going to work through a process where we can extract some of the features from those layers in a vector format to make them, in a sense, more interactive. You can assign information, modify them, change their appearance, etc. So we're going to go through a couple of vectorization processes. And there's going to be a lot more as well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As we go through some of these scenarios, we want to point out certain tips and tricks as ways to use the software to the best of its ability. But let's go back to our previous slide. I'm going to switch very quickly to the application itself. Those of you who are using an older version of Global Mapper currently, you'll notice I am using version 14. We do encourage you as a user of Global Mapper at least to try out the latest version. As you're aware, we do offer a free trial of the latest version of the software. So if you're sitting on an older version, it's certainly in your best interest to download and try the latest version to see if it has functionality that would that meet your requirements. So I will give you some information again at the end of our session, our website, etc., that you can visit to download the latest version. The first little tip I'm going to suggest to you, and this is just, a lot of these are obviously based on my personal preference. These are not necessarily functions that everyone will need to follow, but this is just something that I recommend, and if you have attended one of my training classes, you may have heard me say some of these things as well. The first thing I acknowledge is the background color of our map. Before we even import any data, you'll notice this default color, which is a yellow color, and there's a certain logic to the color that's assigned. Basically, it will provide contrast to any of the map features. My personal preference is to have a white background color. Now, there's nothing to say that this is the right or wrong way, but I'm just going to show you very quickly how we can change this, how we can change our background color. Under the View menu in Global Mapper, you'll notice we have a background color option here, and the default color, as it's been applied, is this yellow color. In my situation, I just choose white. Now, this setting will be applied going forward for whatever workspaces you load or for whatever data you create. So this basically becomes your default, and this is my personal preference. There are occasions when I import some data, specifically some CAD files, which have white features which I can't see, and in those cases I can obviously change the color on an as-needed basis. I can render a different background color. But just as a personal preference, my suggestion is making a color that contrasts with the type of data that you typically work with. Now, again, before we actually look at any specific map information, I want to also point out one of the features within the application, this load sample data function. As was mentioned in previous webinars, this is a new function and replaced a tool that was here previously that simply allowed you to manage your loaded data. Well, we've kind of taken that a step further now. We've actually allowed you to essentially assign what that data is prior to actually launching or during the launch process of the software. We've pre-populated this list with a world map, and if I click this button right now, it basically will bring in a very low-resolution world reference map, which is very useful if your intention is to maybe use one of the online data sources, or perhaps to confirm the location of some files that someone has sent you. You imported some data, you see some features rendered, but you're not sure where they are. Well, you can obviously throw up this sample data set and see exactly where they are in the world. I'm going to unload this file right now, and actually I'm going to minimize my screen and jump quickly to a shortcut. I'm going to show you exactly where that file is located. You'll notice right here under my program files, my Global Mapper 14 sample data. This country's zip file is right in here. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to replace this. I'm going to put a different file in there. And to do this, actually, I'm going to cut out my PowerPoint just temporarily so we don't have to. There we go. I have another file I'm going to import, or actually I'm going to copy into that folder called states. I'm just going to drag and drop. And this is a zipped file. I'm going to pull my countries file out for the time being. So basically, I'm replacing the sample data. Now in Global Mapper, if I click the Load Sample Data button once again, this time it loads a map of the United States. So you can customize the contents of that sample data folder to meet your requirements. Basically, this is like a quick start button to launch whatever data sets that you typically work with or that you use on a recurring basis. It's a simple one-click, it will import, and it will render on the map. Very efficient, very simple, and very clean as far as import is concerned. Some of the other basic functions I want to show you. In delivering an introduction to the software, I typically talk at length about some of the map navigation functions, the way to zoom. We have tools within the view menu for zooming in, zooming out. We have zoom tools, zoom buttons in the toolbar. But when it comes down to it, my recommendation is, assuming you have a mouse connected to your computer, use the mouse for moving around the map. This will become second nature as you become a frequent Global Mapper user. It's almost like driving a car or riding a bike. You don't have to think about it anymore. The idea of zooming in and zooming out, quite simply, use your mouse wheel. The mouse wheel by default will zoom into the location of your cursor. So if I go to Southern California, for instance, and my cursor is in Southern California, my zoom in, zoom out is reference to that location. Also, and this is perhaps a little more hidden, if I click and hold with my mouse wheel, now you're not seeing this obviously, this is on my desk right in front of me, but I'm clicking and holding my mouse wheel, I can now pan the map. So the zooming and panning function can be carried out entirely by the mouse wheel on your mouse. And if you're using a laptop and you don't have a mouse, it's a worthwhile investment just for that one reason, to go out and buy one, because it makes interacting with Global Mapper a lot more efficient, the ability to zoom in and zoom out. Okay, I'm going to unload my data once again, and I'm going to open up a folder here. We've talked in the past about the ability to import data, the various mechanisms for importing data into Global Mapper. We have a button in the toolbar, Open Data Files, prompts you to go find the file. We have the same functionality under the File menu, or you can go to Open Data Files. And you'll notice here we also have a pre-configured keyboard shortcut, Control and the O key on your keyboard, again, initiating that same function. Basically, regardless of what method you choose, it prompts you to browse to the file. Well, a simpler process for importing is to simply drag and drop, and a lot of people aren't aware that this is a supported function. In this case, I have a shapefile of some parcel data, and I'm specifically taking the SHP, the geometric component of my shapefile. I'm going to drag and drop it on my map. In this case, it's a single file. You can see it now represented on my screen, simply dragging and dropping on the map, basically bypassing the whole import process and needing to browse to the file. I can see the file, I can see Global Mapper, drag and drop, and it will initiate the import. Now, in this case, I performed that action with one specific file, but the same would work with multiple files. Simply dragging and dropping multiple files simplifies the import process. Again, another recommendation, and for this I'm actually going to revert back to one of the default settings, so you can see what a new user of Global Mapper would see, and this is specifically related to using the digitizer tool. My digitizer tool is the tool that allows me to interact with the vector features on the map. Its default behavior is in edit mode, and you'll notice my cursor now says edit. And if I select a feature, specifically if I select an area feature, you'll notice the indication that it has been selected is it's filled in with this hatch pattern. And obviously I can select multiple features and it will obviously fill in, again, the same for all features. Now, my personal opinion on that is it works fine if you're, the fairly large features or you're zoomed in pretty close. But if I select a relatively small feature and then zoom out, it's very difficult at this scale for me to see what's been selected. And obviously I could maybe adjust the color of some of the other features, maybe accentuate that pattern just a little bit, but I find that at a certain scale that disappears. So again, this is purely a recommendation based on my usage, but one of the options in the configuration dialog in this function is accessed from the toolbar, the configuration button. And you'll notice I just turned it off, so I'm going to turn it back on again. Under my vector display tab, if I scroll down in this list of options, I have the option to only highlight the border of a selected area feature. If I select that option, I'm going to click OK. You will notice immediately that that little feature that I selected now has become much more prominent. I can see it more clearly. The selection process now, rather than defining the selection based on a fill pattern, now defines it based on a highlighted outline. And obviously this will not work if your features you're trying to select are that yellow color, but in this case it provides a good contrast with these dark outlined area features. So just again, we're throwing in some recommendations, some little tips on using the software, some obviously personal suggestions as to the preferences you may want to think about assigning. One of my bullets during my introduction indicated that I would talk a little bit about workspaces. And I want to clarify some of the kind of misconceptions as to what a workspace is. Basically, a workspace is a file within the context of Global Mapper that enables you to store your current map view, essentially. So in my case, I have a parcel layer in place. I've zoomed in a little closer. Maybe I'm focusing on a particular area of town. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I want to go home. And I want to save this. I want to pick it up the next day. Well, the very simple process, you'll notice the button in the toolbar allows me to save my workspace. Clicking that, I'm prompted to give it a name. I'm just going to call my workspace test for the time being, and I'll click save. Now, what have I created there? What has been created? Well, essentially, I've created a file that references my current zoom level, that references the physical location of my map. In other words, it's basically what you see on my screen that's defined within that workspace file. And it also references the source data. Now, in my case, the actual map itself is the shapefile. The shapefile that I imported from that external file is now referenced in the workspace. So that's what a workspace is. Now, to contrast that, I want to tell you what a workspace isn't. The workspace does not actually contain the map information that you see on my screen. Very often, someone will ask me for help with Global Mapper. They will send me a workspace file asking what's wrong with a particular shapefile, or why can't they do something with a certain image, and they will send me the workspace file. And without exception, I have to email them back politely and say, I'm sorry, that the workspace file you sent me references data that's actually still on your hard drive. I can't see it. So a workspace file is not intended for sharing data. If I browse to the location where I just saved that workspace file, which is right here, you'll notice it's an extremely small file. It's only 5K. The file itself doesn't contain the map information. It merely contains the reference to the information that's on the screen. So certainly use workspaces for managing your data in a local context, managing your configurations. And as you get into using the software in a more advanced way, things like maybe the layout components that you've added to the map, or perhaps the shading pattern, or many modifications, they will all be recorded in your workspace file, but the actual map data will not. Now, there is one exception to that, and that's features that you create yourself. If you grab the digitizer tool, and you grab your area tool, and you create an area, I'm just going to go with the defaults, and I'm going to click OK. Now, that particular feature, if I save my workspace, is actually recorded in the workspace file, because obviously it did not come from an external source. So that is the exception. But usually, normally, the workspace file only contains the path to those external files. And I guess the bottom line is, and the moral of this story is, do not assume that you can use a workspace file for distributing data, and that's what a lot of people think they can do. So a workspace file is a file that stores configuration. A workspace file isn't a file that contains map data. Now, a couple of other configuration options here. And again, I'm going to be working with this particular layer for a while. I'm going to use my digitizer tool. I want to grab this large parcel, and I'm going to move it. Now, I can move it by right-clicking, move shape feature, and you'll notice the option here. You can also notice that we have a pre-configured keyboard shortcut, Control-Shift-M. I find a more efficient way of achieving that same function is to hold the Alt button down on my keyboard. This is one of the few keyboard shortcuts I remember because I use it a lot. I'm holding the Alt button down on my keyboard, and I'm using my digitizer and just simply clicking on the feature. And you'll notice immediately it's in move mode. And I can pick it up and drag it to a new location. Now, one of the things that people often ask us, a question I get very frequently, and if you go onto the forum, you'll see this question is asked quite a lot as well. If I make a modification to a file, such as I've done right here, I've moved this unsuspecting property to a location where it shouldn't be. In fact, I'm even going to go even further. I'm going to delete it. No warning here. I've taken a drastic action. Well, what's the backup here? The Control-Z will not work in this context. We don't. Oh, I'm sorry, it did. We did initiate Control-Z. Control-Z will bring it back to its previous location if it's deleted, but it will not move it back to where it came from. I'm stuck here. Do I have to move it back in manually, or how do I get it back to its original location? Now, based on what I just said a minute ago, we know that the original shapefile is still intact because our workspace simply references that file. By moving this feature, I haven't actually done anything to the shapefile. This movement has simply been recorded in my workspace, not in the shapefile. So in this case, yeah, I could simply re-import my shapefile and it would be back to the way it was before. Or we have a restore option, and this is a function that a lot of people are not aware of. If I select the feature and I right-click and I go to my move, you will notice right in here it says restore original shape of area. In fact, this may be one of the functions you may want to assign as a keyboard shortcut. If you're like me and you do a lot of moving around, a lot of shifting features, you might want to make it a little simpler by assigning a keyboard shortcut. We're going to talk about that process in just a little bit. But for the time being, all I do is choose the restore option, confirming that any modifications I've made will be lost. That's fine. I'm happy with that. And it moves it back to where it was. So that's essentially my undo function if I move a feature to a new location. Now that's for people like me who tend to experiment a little bit. What happens if? Well, now we have a way to get back to the original structure of the data. Now, one final thing about workspaces before we move on. The act of modifying a shapefile, the act of essentially importing, making a change to a shapefile. Let's say again, for good reason, perhaps I do need to move a parcel. I'm going to move this unsuspecting parcel out out of the town area, and I do want to save this. This is actually a legitimate move, just a hypothetical situation. If I hit save right now, my workspace is being saved. My test workspace now retains that information, retains the fact that that parcel has been moved. However, my original shapefile has not been changed. So what if my intention was to provide my client or provide my customer or provide my colleagues with a modified version of their data in shapefile format, including this shifted parcel? How do I do that? How do I perform that function, knowing now that the workspace is simply internal and the original shapefile hasn't been changed? Well, very specifically, the action that will be required for me to assign this change to the source file is to go through the export process. File, export, vector format. I'm not going to go any further with this, but I would have to essentially choose shapefile as my format, choose the appropriate naming, and we would typically recommend not overriding the original file, keep that one intact, but choose an appropriate name, and only after those steps have been followed are you actually essentially changing the data in its source format and having a format that can be delivered to a client. Okay. I'm going to onload my data, just in the interests of simplicity. Control-U is my keyboard shortcut. I'm going to bring it back in again. And once again, my data is back intact. As I suggested, my shapefile is in its original format. Now, when you import a layer, one of the things you will notice that these features are essentially assigned to a type. And clicking the feature info button, you'll see it says unknown area type. Doesn't know what they are. They're basically unknown. One of the recommendations that I push during my training classes is to really address this feature type within Global Mapper, especially in the context of the work that you would typically do with Global Mapper. Make these relevant. Unknown area type is very abstract. It doesn't mean anything. And it's a default. When you import, for instance, a shapefile, it will be assigned to that feature type. Now, in the configuration dialog box, those of you who have been in here, you will note that there's point styles, area styles, and line styles. In this case, obviously, we're dealing with areas, so I'm going to click my area styles button. And you'll see a list of all of the features that are currently available. I can assign these imported areas as rock or runways or reefs or any of these available options. There's one called parcels here, which I actually did myself. I'm going to delete that. I'll apply that change. Okay, let's assume that there is no parcels type. But these are parcels. I want to assign these features to a type that is more meaningful. In my case, parcels. We would suggest using this new type option, because by assigning these to a particular type, you can not only assign a default shading pattern or a default fill pattern if necessary, but you can also define a set of attributes that will be added as you create additional parcels. So basically, I'm going to click on the New Type option, and my new type is going to be called parcels. I can define the color characteristics, and again, these are simply the default. Just for visual clarity, I'm going to choose a bright color so we can actually see some changes here. I'm going to make these partially transparent, just a kind of a semi-transparent color. My border style, I can assign that as well, border width, etc., etc., etc. I can even assign a font to this new type of feature if necessary. I'll just leave the default the font default for the time being. So I've created my new type called parcels. I could edit it. I could delete it if necessary, and I can only delete the types that I create. I can't delete any of the pre-configured types of features. I can also add attributes as necessary. So again, when I assign a feature to this type, it will automatically inherit the attributes. I click the Attributes button, and I add an attribute. And just for simplicity, I'm going to type in the word type to my type of a parcel in this case. I can also pre-populate the attribute value. Now, in normal circumstances, you wouldn't, because whatever you type in here would be automatically assigned to every feature that's to which we assign this new type that we're going to create. So in other words, every time we assign a parcel, the attribute value that I type in here would be automatically assigned. There may be occasions when you do want to populate this. Now, I'm thinking of a situation specifically with parcels where 90% of my parcels are residential. So I'm going to automatically assign an attribute value of residential. Now, that's not to say that I can't edit on an as-needed basis, but at least it saves a little bit of work, because automatically, if every time I create a parcel, it's populated with a new attribute code type, and that attribute value is residential, I'm saving myself a lot of work. Granted, there's going to be 10% of the time I may have to change it to industrial or commercial or whatever, but that's a lot easier than having to type everything. So we click OK, and we click OK, and once again, we click OK. We now have a type that we can assign to these features. How do I make them parcels now? They're still unknown feature types. All I've done to this point is created the type. Well, there's a couple of ways I can do that. If I open my Overlay Control Center, I've got my one layer listed here. I have the Options button at the bottom, and I have the option to classify any unclassified area features as, and with all things going according to plan, my new parcels type is now listed here. I can automatically make all of these parcels. That will be method number one. I can also do it selectively using my digitizer tool. Either an individual parcel or a select group of parcels, or perhaps the result of a search, or perhaps the result of some sort of other selection process within a buffer, within an area. I can assign the feature type based on what has been selected. And the way to do that is simply, after the selection has been made, right-click on my map and choose the Edit dialog, or the Edit function, which brings up the often used Modify Selected Features dialog box. And once again, I have feature type as a drop-down. And once again, if everything goes according to plan, I do have parcels as well. So I can assign just the selected features to this particular type. In my case, I'm going to go with option 1. Option parcel is going to be selected. And we'll click OK. And as I would have expected, everything changes color. So I've assigned these to a type that's more meaningful than just a generic unknown feature type. Now, if I create a new feature, very quickly, I can, again, assign that to the same type. We will go to parcels, and I'll also add it to the appropriate layer as well. And you will notice now my attribute table has pre-populated with the type. And with this is a residential parcel, so I can leave it as is. And I click OK. Each successive area feature that I create will remember these settings, and I don't even have to do anything. So it simplifies data creation, and it certainly keeps your data a lot more organized. While we were talking about the area styles, we can also do the same with line styles, and we can do the same with point styles. With point styles, there's the added benefit of being able to add your own symbol. Basically, you can import a graphic file and customize not only the feature type itself, but also the visual appearance of the icon or the symbol that will appear on your map. I'm not going to go through that workflow right now in the interest of time, but it's a case of simply adding the symbol and making it available for a new type of point feature that you add. Okay. Let me quickly clean up my map here. I'm going to delete my two features. Okay. Now, one of the other points I made in my agenda presentation was that we have this spatial bookmarking function. Workspaces, as we mentioned before, record the location of your map. Basically, they allow you to establish a defined zoom level, defined geographic coordinates, and record that. Within the context of a workspace, you can also record specific locations. So let's say in the context of my parcels, let's say I'm working in an area right up here towards the north. Maybe I'm working on a project with a particular parcel. Sure, I could create a subset of my workspace by using the file save workspace as function, but that might get a little carried away. If you create a new workspace for every project you're working on, you'll have a lot of workspace and a lot of repetition in terms of the data. A more efficient way for me to record this location is to go to my view menu and to save the current view. Now I can do this in a couple of ways. If I simply save the current view, it's essentially a temporary function. Browse away, maybe go to another location, I can restore that last saved view. Alt-R and Control-R are the keyboard shortcuts to control that function. But that's a temporary, essentially short-term fix, if you like, and I can record one location at a time. A more efficient tool is for me to name and save the current view. Prompts me to give this a name. Parcel 123, perhaps would be the way that we would represent this. I'll click OK. The option I have now is to record this location just in my current workspace or across all workspaces. Well, in this case, it's only relevant to the data I'm working on right now, so I'm going to click Yes, and now I've recorded that location. And again, I could zoom to another location, perhaps to work on another parcel, go back into my View menu, and Restore Named View. It's the option I have now, which will give me a list of all of those named views, and I just select whatever I want and click OK, and it's brought me back to where I was. Essentially, spatial bookmarking. Think of this as like putting a thumbtack on a map on the wall. You can very easily jump back to another location, and you're not creating another workspace. There's no need for that in this context. You're simply recording a particular location. Okay, let's talk very quickly about label optimization. Now, I'm going to use the same layer as I have displayed now. We're going to talk in this context specifically about labeling areas. Let's assume that I want to assign labels to the features you're seeing on this in this layer. I believe one of the attributes that I have attached to these parcels is the ID number. And let's assume that I want to use that attribute value as my label. If I go into my Overlay Control Center and I click my Options button, I can choose which attribute to use as my label. In this case, I believe it's state ID. And everything else is fine, and that's fine. I'm going to click OK, and we'll see my labels displayed. Now, we don't have a great deal of control over these labels right now. The labels are basically positioned based on the geometric centroid. They don't appear to work in many cases. Obviously, there's a label right here which seems to cross the boundaries a little bit. So there are going to be occasions when I want to have a little more control over the placement of labels. I'm going to show you a trick now that we can use to achieve that very purpose. Now, before I do that, I'm going to disable labels for my areas. And I'm actually going to do it at the feature type level. Now, back in my area styles where we created our parcels, I'm going to opt not to show labels for this type of feature. So I'm temporarily going to disable the display of labels on my screen. Click OK. And there we go. We've turned off our labels. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new layer. And this new layer is going to have the sole purpose of displaying labels for this particular parcel layer. And the way I do that is, first of all, I need to select all of the features within this parcel layer. I could do that by using my digitizer tool and dragging a box around the extent of the layer. Now that's okay, except if I happen to have any other layers in place, it would not only select my parcels, but it would also select the other features as well. There are ways of filtering that, but that seems a little bit more involved. An easier solution is to right-click in the Overlay Control Center and to choose Select All Features in the selected layer. Basically, I'm, as the name of the menu items implies, selecting all of these area features at one time. Now I'm going to right-click on my map. I'm going to go to my Advanced Feature Creation options, and I'm going to create new points at the centroids of each selected area. In this case, I'm generating a point feature that represents the middle, geometric middle, if you like, of the parcels. And you'll see those are automatically selected. Now, by default, they are, again, unknown feature types, which in this case doesn't really work for me. I don't really want a point on my map. I want to change that feature type. So I'm going to right-click. Actually, no, I was going to say right-click and select all. They are all selected already. All I need to do is change their type. So I can either go to, as I did before, go to my options area, or I can right-click and choose edit. I'm going to go to options once again, and I'm going to make all of my point features text. Now, text is basically a point feature that doesn't have any associated symbol. It's an invisible symbol, so to speak. And when I select this and click OK, you will notice now that the points have disappeared, and I now have text on my map. And that text is essentially in the same location that it would have been if I derived these labels from the underlying areas, except now they are independent of the areas which were used to create them. So if there are situations where I need to modify the location, I can simply select the text feature. I'll actually hold my Alt button down again so I can move it after I select it, and I can move it to wherever I want within this area. Again, holding my Alt button down, I can move it. I can apply a rotation. I can rotate the text if necessary. So I'm going to choose this guy right here. Maybe this label in the context of the map that you're creating maybe needs the label to be aligned with the parcel itself. In this case, I'm actually going to go in and actually modify that particular feature. Again, we're dealing with a point symbol that's completely invisible, so it doesn't matter where we put it. The point was used simply to render the label itself. Now we have the flexibility to move it around. Knowing that the attributes of that point were derived from the underlying areas, so we know we're getting the correct labels. Again, right-click. This time I'm going to go to my Edit option because I'm only editing one particular feature. For that particular feature, I'm going to specify the style. I'm actually going to keep the original style in place. It still is no symbol, but I'm going to select my name font position, and I'm going to apply a rotation. Now, this rotation is based on the assumption that the x-axis is at 0 degrees, so I'm going to rotate it slightly downwards, which would be a negative number in this case, and I'm just going to guess. Obviously, trial and error would work in the real world. I'm going to go about, what, minus 40 degrees, and we'll click OK. Oops, I have to click OK on this window first, and then click OK. Not bad, pretty close. So you can see now I can align the text based on whatever angle I apply, whatever geometric angle or whatever angle relative to the x-axis. Okay, the other thing that we can do with labels is we can assign the labels to be a specific height relative to the ground as opposed to a specific pixel height. Now you'll notice in this case, when I get further out, my labels become pretty meaningless because the text obviously obliterates the underlying area for which they're intended to represent. So perhaps I want to set up a situation where the labels themselves are a defined height relative to the ground. And I can do that again for individual features, or I can make that modification for that particular feature type. Again, we're going back into our configuration dialog. For the point styles text option, I choose my label font, and I specify that the labels are not going to be defined by the point size you see defined here, but rather are going to be displayed at a fixed height. And I'm just going to estimate a physical height of 10 meters in my case. In which case, if I zoom out, the text will become smaller. As I zoom in, the text will become larger relative to my screen. I'll click OK on that, and click OK once again. And this is now, as you see, at a fixed height. Now, the downside of that, obviously, is it becomes fairly hard to read when we get further out. And in fact, it makes my map look a little strange. So in looking at my scale, I'm approximately at 1 to 5,000 scale right here. Perhaps 1 to 4,000 might be a good cutoff. Because my label layer is now independent of my original parcels layer, I can define the zoom level extent for this layer. In other words, what range of zoom levels do I want to see this particular label in? And I can specify, set up what zoom levels to display the selected layer at. And a couple of options I have here. I'm going to go straight to below a certain scale. And in my case, it's below about 1 to 4,000. That's a ballpark. And obviously, trial and error, again, may be the best method for defining the extent of the visibility of this layer. We'll click OK. And again, we'll click OK. Now, you'll see my labels do not actually appear until I get closer into the feature. So here, again, I would obviously in the real world spend a little more time actually, doing precise label placement, but I now have that option. Because the labels are now derived from points as opposed to the underlying areas, I do have the ability to essentially disassociate the two and move the label around independently, rotate it, size it, delete it if necessary, customize it by simply modifying that particular attribute for that point. I can customize the label, so I do have a lot more flexibility when it comes to working with labels. Okay, moving along, and I have a long list of additional tips and tricks I want to show you. Let me jump straight to talking about thematic mapping very quickly. I'm going to unload my data again. That's Control-U keyboard shortcut. I'll try that one more time, Control-U. And prompting me if I want to save my changes. Obviously, I've made some changes to this workspace, or I haven't actually saved my workspace in this context. I'm going to say no in this case. In the real world, obviously, you'll want to make sure you do save your workspaces. I'm going to open up some different data. In this case, I'm going to open up a layer. Again, another shapefile, in this case, the town boundaries in the state of Maine, where we're located here, Northeast U.S. Okay. If I select my feature info tool, this particular layer is pre-populated with some data, one of which is our DOT region. You'll notice it says Eastern in this case. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to visually represent that information on the map through the creation of what's called a thematic map, a map that renders or represents some of the underlying data. And I do that from the Overlay Control Center. The Overlay Controls, the list of layers essentially, because after selecting the layer and clicking the Options button, I have a tab that allows me to define my area styles. I want to drag this out of the way so we can see the consequences of my selection underneath. This again is an unknown area type. In the context of what I talked to you previously about, I would probably suggest you assign these particular features to a more logical type, in this case probably towns, or some feature type that you create yourself. But in the interest of time, I'll bypass that step. And regardless of which style has been assigned based on that feature type, I can override that. And I can use the same style if necessary. I can essentially override the default for all features. I can assign a random color, which also makes a very interesting map. I'm just going to hit apply in this case. Ooh, there we go. Essentially random colors now assigned to each of these area features. Makes some visually interesting map rendering. Or I can apply styling based on an attribute. Now the attribute I want to choose in this case, as I previewed a minute ago, is my DOT region. My DOT region contains, I believe, 6 variables, and we're going to see those represented when I click the OK button. My DOT region, I want to see the list of variables that are available within this particular attribute displayed here, and I can do that either manually, which is what you would typically do if this particular field were a numeric field, and you had to essentially assign them numeric values in a way that divided your data up in a logical way. In my case, there are recurring instances of the same value. So I'm going to simply click this Initialize from Values button, and it will pre-populate this list. Now I want to choose some random colors. I'm just going to base this on a red color. Make sure it's got a solid fill, and I'll click OK. And now it's asking me if I would like to assign a random color to each additional value. Now again, this is going to be, I think, 6 different variables, maybe 5 different variables within this particular layer. I'm going to say yes. And you'll see it's now pre-populated this table. I may want to change the colors, which I can do individually. Looks like northern and eastern are variations on the shade of red just because of the random color assignment. So I can change these, make these whatever color I want, but the list itself is populated based on what Global Mapper saw within this particular attribute field. And I click Apply, and we now have a meaningful map. We now have a map that actually represents our data, represents the inherent information within our data. Very simple process of generating a thematic map. The print layout options, assuming the next step in this process after you've created this presentation quality map, we have in different contexts talked about some of the print layout options. The button in the toolbar allows me to put a distance scale, a legend, and obviously in the context of this map it would be important to put a legend on here to represent what those colors are displaying. We can put some text, a heading for our map, or perhaps another piece of text describing how we created the map, so that can be placed. These features that I add are all assigned to a position on your page layout, not to a geographic location. Now, one of the questions we get quite a lot is, how do I add a graphic file I don't see an option in this dialog box to put an image. Let's say I wanted to put my corporate logo at the bottom of my printed map, or perhaps if I'm generating a PDF, how do I put that logo at the bottom of my PDF? Well, again, there's no option within the layout tools, but there is a tool in Global Mapper that will allow you to do that. And this is another little trick. Under the File menu, one of the Open options is to open a data file at a fixed screen location. And if you choose this Open option, it basically allows you to choose from all of the currently supported formats. You'll notice all of our standard spatial formats are supported here, and regardless of any of the inherent positional characteristics, this Open function will allow you to put this feature, or this, whatever features are in this layer, at a defined location. So what I want to do is I want to choose a JPEG. I have a corporate logo, which is basically our blue marble banner logo, and I'm going to open it. Now, because I'm defining this based on a specific location relative to my layout, it's going to ask me where exactly I want to put this particular logo, and I'm going to give it towards the right edge. I want to go for about ½ an inch from the right edge view, and again about ½ an inch from the bottom of my map, and I'm going to make it cover about 33% of my width. Obviously, this is something you can try and modify as needed. And we'll click OK. And now we can see a nice logo that appears right at the bottom of my screen, right at the bottom of my printed map. This is not geographically referenced. As I move my map around, it stays in the same position relative to my layout, or in this case, relative to my screen. Any file that you can import in the Global Mapper can be rendered in this way, can be rendered in a way that it's not geographically referenced, but actually positioned appropriate to a page layout. So in accompanying your legend or your title or your compass rose, if it's relevant, you can now put a graphic file on there as well. And just as a sidebar to this, if I were to save my workspace right now, the appearance of this banner would be saved in the workspace as well. So you can apply this in a different context. Okay, let me go back and refresh my town's workspace, and we will unload all of our data. I want to show you a very cool way to use our one of the tools that you may be familiar with, which is essentially a geometric tool for putting a hole in a feature. And for this analogy, I'm going to choose an unsuspecting town. Choose one that will work. Here we go. I'm not even sure what town it is, but little do they know that they are going to be obliterated. There, I've just deleted the town from my layer. You'll notice in my overlay control center, main towns has got a certain number of features with one deleted. I could, in a different context, I could bring that back by undeleting it again. But let's take this particular situation, and let's assume that I'm going through a CAD process or a drawing process where I want to create this last feature. Now, having done this process in the past, I know how excruciating it can be, especially when we look at the structure of this part of my area. I would have to essentially replicate every one of these shape points in order to create the feature that would fill in the middle, if you like. That could be kind of difficult. So I'm going to use our feature for creating a hole in a feature in a very creative way. Now, just to put this in a little context first, I'm going to generate a new area feature right here. I'm not going to worry about that feature type, just to show you how this tool works as it's designed. In this case, I want to use my newly created area feature to cut a hole in this larger polygon, again, this town polygon. And I've selected with my digitizer tool. I simply right-click. I go to my cropping functions, and I cut selected area from another area. Choose that option. I'm prompted to choose the parent, which is the outer polygon. I just simply click anywhere in the outer polygon. And would I like to mark the feature as deleted? In this case, I don't. And I end up with two features. One, essentially the proverbial donut, and the other one, the hole in the donut. So I created a hole, in this case occupied by another feature. So that's the normal use of that tool. What I'm going to show you is a creative use of the same tool. So again, my intention is to draw the missing polygon, so to speak. First thing I do is I essentially use my area tool and I draw a larger area. Doesn't matter the precision, but it's simply encompassing the extent of the middle, the area in the middle. Now in this case, it's a town. I'm not sure if I have a pre-for. Yes, I do. I'm going to use the same feature type, town, and click OK. Now, obviously what you're seeing here is it's overlapping. So what I want to do is I want to cut the inner part from the outer part, so to speak. And the way I do that is first by using my digitizer tool and selecting each individual outside polygon. It's essentially reversing what we did before. When I do that, I'm going to initiate the cut process. Now, to simplify this a little bit, because I don't have to repeat this several times, rather than me having to right-click and go through the menu items, this gives me a little opportunity to go to on a sidebar and to show you our keyboard shortcut option. Because this is a case where I'm using a tool repeatedly, and I don't want to have to right-click and go to the menu. I want to assign a keyboard shortcut to perform this function for me. Keyboard shortcuts are essentially available for all of the functions you see listed here, including my cut selected area from another area tool. I'm going to select that. I'm going to assign it the keyboard shortcut of F3 in my case. You can use any of these available drop-downs modified by any of the other keys you see here. So there's a long list of available keyboard shortcut options that will be available. And we'll add and update that. So F3 in my case is going to be this cut area feature option. I don't have to go to my digitizer right-click again. So once again, I'm going to be cutting this area from this area. This is the area that I'm going to be cutting, using to cut my inner area. I select that. I hit F3. I choose my parent. I select no, and there's my first cut assigned. I go through the same thing again, and no each time, and you'll notice as I go around each of these individual polygons, it's being trimmed down to the extent of this area. Again, F3 is my keyboard shortcut. Unfortunately, you're not seeing that part of it. That's physically me hitting my keyboard. Choose my parent, click no, and continue the process. Almost done. F3, my parent, no, 2 more to go. Oh, F3, my parent, no. F3, my parent, no. There we go. I recreated, or in this context, perhaps we should think of it as created. I created a pretty complex polygon in this case, matching perfectly the shape points for the internal area by using my essentially tool that was intended for creating islands, and it works perfectly in this context. It works perfectly, cropping it right out. I've actually embarked on a parcel mapping project before where essentially I had to replicate every vertex, and it was excruciating. Inevitably, you'll end up with gaps or overlap. This ensures that you can create abutting polygons that have no overlap whatsoever. So a little creative use of one of the available tools in Global Mapper. Okay, let me change focus, and I know we're slowly running out of time here. Let me unload my previous data, and we're going to bring up some elevation data. We'll not save those changes. And we're going to bring up some elevation data. Now, if any of you have sat through some of our webinars before, you've probably seen this process. It's a function that's a very powerful and important component of Global Mapper, and that's essentially our cut and fill calculation. Those of you who are considering Global Energy Mapper, there's a really enhanced set of functions related to calculation of cut and fill. I'm using the standard version right now, so I'm going to do a very basic operation. I'm going to go through the cut and fill process very quickly here with one specific intention, and it's based on a question that was asked of me during one of my training classes. Cut and fill, for those of you who are not familiar, allows me to create a flattened terrain surface or calculate the volume that would allow us to flatten a terrain. What you're not seeing in this map, by the way, there's some underlying elevation data. I've overlaid my imagery, so you're not actually seeing that, but it's there. Now, in order to flatten the area, let's assume this is a building site that I need to create a flattened surface. I simply right-click, I go to my analysis measurement, and I go to volume calculation, cut and fill. Right now, all I'm interested in doing is finding my break-even height. Now, this is the important part. My break-even height in this case is 103.752 meters. That's the height, the optimal height at which I wouldn't have to remove any fill from this area or bring any fill in order to flatten the terrain. So that's a process that we've done many times. If those, again, have been through some of our webinars or my training classes, will have seen me going through this scenario. The question that has been asked of me is, okay, we know what the break-even height is. Now, where is that within the context of this polygon? Where is the linear feature that would define that break-even height? And I scratched my head for a while and said, well, you know what, that's a very good question. How do I do that? And we came up with a couple of solutions, the most effective of which is to use our contouring tool. If I select this feature and I go to my terrain analysis and I generate contours. Generate contours is a standard function that's used by many, many global mapper users for delineating contours based on a user-defined contour interval. Because this is selected, we do have the option to define the contour bounds based on a selected feature. So that's what I'm going to do first of all. In other words, I do not want contours outside of my box, just inside of my box. So I'm basically limiting the contour generation. I'm going to my contour options, and I'm going to define the contour interval. In this case, and I'm glad I wrote it down in my little scratch pad here, 103.752 was our break-even height. Very precise. We only want to generate the contour at that height. We're not interested in a contour spacing in this context, but just in a specific height. I can also generate areas. I'm not concerned about generating areas right now. I'm just going to turn that one off. This is one of the scenarios I was going to show as well, the idea of actually generating an area feature to represent defined elevations. Also within the context of this box, I want to show you we can also generate spot heights, which is another useful function to determine at a particular location or within a defined area the maximum and minimum elevations. Kind of hidden in here in the contour generation dialog box, you have that option. But basically, this is all I need to do. I click OK. Again, knowing that I've constrained my contours to my selected feature, and what you'll see at the end of the process is a line feature that tells me where that break-even height is. So I can generate that map, share that with my contractor or whatever, and he can see precisely. Obviously, we can conclude in this case that the upslope area is a little flatter than the downslope because we've obviously got more geographic area that would be cut as opposed to filled. This is the downslope slide over here. So. Okay, a couple of other things I want to show you. I'm just looking through my notes here, making sure. I mentioned vectorization. I think with this one I will wrap up because we're getting towards the top of the hour. The ability to generate vector features from rasters. I'm going to go through a couple of scenarios and then we'll wrap up. Apologies if we may go over our designated hour. Hopefully you can hang out for another couple minutes. I want to kind of conclude with this, and then again we'll wrap up after we're done with this particular scenario. Again, I'm going to unload all of my data, Control U, and I'm going to bring in one additional file here. This is a US topographic map. I've zoomed into a particular area. Now this is a raster layer. It's a scanned USGS 1 to 24,000 quad map. And you'll notice we have these this road intersection. This is a raster, obviously. This is a picture. These are basically pixels on my screen. But what I want to do in this scenario is to actually generate vector features from these areas. And specifically, I'm interested in these roads in the red features. And the way that I do that, in my Overlay Control Center, with the layer selected, I right-click, and I create area features from equal values in selected layer. I've had a lot of people mention to me that they've seen this option in this right-click list, but never really known what it does. So I'm going to show you. In this case, the area features that I'm going to create are the roads, and the equal values in this context are colors. You bring up this dialog box because this is a raster. It's asking me for a color to create colors. And if I simply click OK in this context, it's going to create area features for every color in the map. Well, that's not what I want. I only want a specific color in this case. I'm going to go ahead and click this option, and you'll notice this is a limited palette for this particular map. It's a standard palette for the DRG data, digital raster graphic data. So I want to choose my red color in this case. I may want to define a match distance that goes beyond what I'm seeing right here, above or below. I'll just leave it at 0. I think this should work in this context. And we'll simply click OK. Oh, I also want to define the area bounds, limited to what I'm seeing on my screen in this case. I almost forget to do that, but in this case, I don't want anything beyond what I'm looking at on the screen. I'm going to click OK. And it should generate vector area features that correspond with those red roads. And I'm just going to quickly turn off my original TIFF, and you'll notice I now have vectors. These vectors can be smoothed as necessary. If I zoom a little closer, you'll notice they're jagged, which basically means that the pixels in the original raster correspond with the shapes that were added, or the vectors that were vertices that were added in the vector feature. But I can select it. I can right-click after selecting it with my digitizer. I can go to my Move Reshape, and I can smooth. And it will give it a little more of an aesthetically appealing, and I can repeat that process, obviously, to smooth it even further. So that's a way to pull out vector features from an image layer, and my final quick illustration of that function relates to elevation. I'm going to bring in my elevation layer. This is basically a standard USGS DEM derived elevation layer. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to limit the extent of this layer. And the way that I do that is under my options, alter elevation values. I'm going to say I only want elevations up to 30 meters. I'm going to click OK. And you'll notice now my display is limited to from 0 to 30 meters. Again, my intention here is to create vector features. I want to vectorize this. Now, this is a little bit different than the previous process because it's not based on color, but it's based on actual elevation. And because I've created a finite elevation range from 0 to 30, I can basically capture the entire extent. So again, I right-click on my Overlay Control Center, create area features as before. This is always going to be available when you're working with raster data. But in this case, it has recognized that we don't have colors involved. We have actual elevations. And I can define a match distance within which my area features will be created. If I left it at 0, it would be basically an area feature for every elevation, which is not what I want. I want one large area feature. So I'm going to expand this beyond 30 meters. I'm going to put in 100. It doesn't really matter, which basically means my threshold is 100 meters above or below, meaning that everything in this layer will be, in this area will be one layer. And again, area bounds is fine. I click OK. And I now have a single area feature encompassing the full extent of that defined elevation range. Again, I can apply smoothing. Because this is a vector feature, I could use one of the selection tools that lets me find the properties that are going to be affected by this. Maybe it's a rise in sea level, perhaps. So giving it a vector layer, it's a more interactive. You can apply data to it. You can do a search based on the extent of this layer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, a creative use of one of the tools in Global Map. And with that, we will wrap up. Again, apologies for those of you who are on a schedule. We overshot our time just a little bit. Let me go ahead and fire up my slideshow again. I promised I would give you some contact information. By the way, if you go to our bluemarblegeo.com website, as of a couple of days ago, we have refreshed our site. We're very interested in your comments about the website, if it's providing clear information or if it's easy to work with. So please, your feedback is always welcome on our website. I always plug the Global Mapper Forum. Those of you who haven't visited, I do encourage you to go to the forum, register, and participate. Ask questions, or even browse through some of the discussions that have taken place in there. It's a very, very good way to learn some of the tips and tricks within the software. Our support is always open, GM support, and we will try to answer your questions. If we didn't answer your questions today, we will hopefully get to those by way of follow-up, or at a later date, you can obviously email GM support. And ordering information and training. What you got today was a snapshot of how we approach our training. So if you're interested in expanding this and maybe customizing this for your company, certainly shoot us an email to training@bluemarblegeo.com, and we'd be more than happy to accommodate your training. Again, thank you very much for attending, and thanks for your continued interest in Global Mapper. And we will come around again next month and hopefully share some more useful information about the application. Have a great day.